Let me talk to Steve Friend. Steve is a whistleblower with the FBI. They have made his life miserable, but he doesn't care. He's doing the right thing. He's one of the good guys that you used to see and you used to believe that existed in places like the FBI. He really is that guy. True blue, cares about the country and the Constitution. He blew the whistle on the FBI in Florida when they went full SWAT on Mar-a-Lago, which we know now was absolutely unnecessary and way out of protocol. Steve is with us now because I wanted to get him on because the guy who authorized that and then dummied evidence up is the guy in charge now of the FBI's investigation of this shooter. How good does that make you feel, Steve?
Oh, well, I mean, it actually goes a little bit deeper than that, Glenn. This is probably going to need the old chalkboard out here to explain to the audience, but this is Mr. Jeffrey Veltri. And for your audience's edification, before he assumed his post in FBI Miami as a special agent in charge, he was the Deputy Assistant Director of the Security Division for the FBI, and that's the branch that's going after the whistleblowers. And from that post, he actually said that whistleblowers that they were looking to purge from the ranks were people who were military veterans because he thought that they were disloyal,
yes,
as well as people who attended regular religious worship ceremonies and opposed the coronavirus vaccine. And then when the word came down, he was going to go to the FBI Miami office, Christopher Wray and Deputy Director Paula Bate and Executive Assistant Director Jen Moore, also another person who was involved in getting rid of all the whistleblowers, said that he had to cleanse his Facebook account of all the anti-Trump vitriol that he publicly put out there. And now he's in a position of authority in my FBI Miami office, and that is the office that has the responsibility for investigating this latest assassination attempt.
So you think the guy who wanted to purge the FBI of military people, religious people, and Trump supporters might not do an honest investigation? Is that what I'm hearing, Steve?
Well, I mean, throwing out a little sarcasm here, Glenn, but at the same time, I mean, this is the agency that looked at the 2017 congressional baseball shooting where a Bernie Sanders supporter showed up, asked where other Republicans, and then proceeded to try to kill 10% of the Republican caucus. And the FBI investigated, said that was not an assassination attempt. That was suicide by cop.
Steve, what has to happen to the FBI? I was, unfortunately, I made a statement right after my wife called me and she said, "Have you heard the news?" And I said, "Oh, dear God, what?" And she said, "They tried to kill the president again." And then I had people asking me for comments and everything else, so I rushed to X, I shouldn't have, and made a statement that was just raw. And then Spaces asked me to come on and make another statement, and that was even more raw, and I shouldn't have done it. I was really, really upset at this. But at some point after I had calmed down in the interview, I said, we have to fumigate all of the federal government. I mean, if you really wanted to do this right, to return it to factory settings, you have to shut it down and restart again. Turn it on and turn it back off, turn it off and turn it back on again, and restore the factory settings to the Constitution. These things have to be fumigated. They just have to be out. All of these people need to be fired, even the good ones, because we don't know who's good and bad, and we have to start from scratch. Is that what it's going to take, Steve?
100%. And this goes back to when we were first introduced a couple of years ago, and I told you that one of my greatest concerns was that the FBI was going to be one of the major contributors to the boiling pot. They continue to raise the temperature and have the factionalization that's happened within the country, and the FBI is convinced half of one side that the other half wants to kill them because they're Nazi terrorists and extremists. And the FBI has just followed suit. They've become more and more politicized. And if you did not know anything else, and I'm done talking about the good men and women of the FBI, if you don't know anything else about the FBI, and I told you, as an American taxpayer, are you willing to give $12 billion to an organization which in 2016 took a fake dossier to open a fake counterintelligence investigation of candidate and then eventual President Trump, opened illegal FISA wiretaps, then used those FISA wiretaps to find out in 2020 about the ne'er-do-well son of then candidate Joe Biden having a laptop that was already in the FBI's possession, and they stood idly by as 51 intelligence officials said that it was Russian disinformation, and then went to social media companies and told them to censor that information, essentially to generate a talking point for a presidential debate. You would say, that's a secret police force. That is the death of a republic. We have to control, alt, delete it.
Let me ask you, did you see Merrick Garland's speech last week?
I did, unfortunately, but I was grateful that Tulsi Gabbard reached out to me and then and highlighted the fact that this is a completely broken and weaponized Department of Justice that should also be on the chopping block.
Tulsi Gabbard has just been so great. I just love her. I saw her say it was hard not to laugh if it wasn't so true. But this speech that he gave last week, that they are on the up and up, that there's no corruption, and he won't hear of the good men and women of the Justice Department. You have to be insane, Steve. You have to be insane to believe what this government is telling you now about all of these things.
Well, I mean, you have half of the country that's convinced that the other half is radical and rabid, and they've been told that for the last 8 years because they had prefer the Republican candidate for president in the last 3 presidential elections, and the Department of Justice is the teeth on the attack dog, and they are sending out their forces, their stormtroopers in force to go after the perceived political enemies of the current administration, and that includes 89-year-old women who are concentration camp survivors that were praying outside of abortion clinics, and it includes guys like my friend Garrett O'Boyle, who came forward for the right reason at the right time and made a nonpartisan whistleblower disclosure and who was recommended for perjury charges when, in effect, there's actual concrete evidence that that was not true. And I was grateful also that you over at The Blaze, Joe Hanneman and Steve Baker contributed to his story highlighting that last week.
Did you see what Robert F. Kennedy said on Saturday? He's now being investigated for something that happened 20 years ago. He said, I received a letter from the National Marine Fisheries Institute saying that they were investigating me for collecting a whale specimen 20 years ago. Now, how does that happen? I mean, at this time, if it isn't the weaponization of government?
It doesn't, and this is just more evidence. I don't know what it's going to require to incentivize our elected officials to actually come to the conclusion that going after RFK, going after an 89-year-old concentration camp survivor, for them to say that we have to avert a government shutdown is effectively saying that it is a better outcome for the government to go after individuals like RFK rather than have us go through a temporary partial government shutdown that looked a lot like Labor Day weekend. And I think the American people, I don't know how many of them perished over that weekend due to the government being shut down partially, but I think it's more of an optimal solution, and it just hasn't been put forward by the people that we elected, and they pledged to us that they would end weaponization, and it hasn't happened in the 2 years that they've been at the helm.
Can you tell me, Steve, last question, what are the questions that have to be answered on this shooting?
I want to know how an individual was posted up at a golf course, because there's no reason that he out there expecting it unless he was out there every single day. So there's either some sort of operational security issue or there was some sort of coordination. I was willing and actually of the belief that Butler, Pennsylvania was due to the myth of competence of the Secret Service. They just hadn't been tested for 4 decades. They had lots of failures that always went on. But the fact that this guy was able to be there at a time when Donald Trump he doesn't play golf there every single day. He would
No. And it was not on his schedule. I mean, it was not on his schedule that he be at Mar-a-Lago, although you could have made that it was a reasonable, he has a day off from the campaign. It's a reasonable assumption. But him playing golf, that CNN has now verified, that was a last-minute addition. So how did this guy know that?
That is a huge question, as it also is the fact that that's a regular location for him to go. And since he's been in public office for the last almost decade now, you would think there would be additional security measures there. That's just regular threat assessment to harden that place. It's not like he was at Augusta National or TPC Sawgrass, another entirely different golf course. That's his regular place, and they did not do that. So that's a security failure, but the fact that he was able to be there at that time and that place, and what people don't understand is 300 to 500 yards. If you're playing golf, that's far. If you're shooting a rifle, that's barely reaching out and touching someone by the nose.
Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate it. Thank you for everything you've done. A man who's been dragged through the mud and made his life made a living hell just because he stood up in the FBI and said, no, this is wrong. I won't do that. A whistleblower extraordinaire, Steve Friend.